Assalamu alaikum, sir. Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I am Hassanur Jaman Mandal from West Bengal, India. It's mentioned in the Quran in Surah Qiyamah, chapter 75, verse number 8, that on the day of judgment the moon will be unlighted. Though I don't know the actual meaning, just I got from somewhere. But now we see that the moon is unlighted. That what does it mean? If the above mentioned meaning becomes true, then isn't it a contradiction? What the Hassan Noor has quoted is a verse from the Quran from Surah Qiyamah, chapter 75, verse number 8, talking about وَقَصَفَ الْقَمَرِ. وَقَصَفَ الْقَمَرِ means when the moon is buried in darkness. It also means that when the moon it becomes darkened. Or some of the translations say when the moon is eclipsed. So وَقَصَفَ الْقَمَرِ means when the moon is buried in darkness or when the moon is eclipsed. For the real context, if you read from Surah Qiyamah, from verse number 1, we come to know that it's talking about Qiyamah, the day of resurrection. And the non-Muslims, when they ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when they ask the believers, how will Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala be able to reconstruct our bones? Because after we have been buried and all our bones have been disintegrated, how will Allah be able to reconstruct our bones on the day of judgment? So Allah replies in the Quran, talking verse 1, 2, 3, 4, that we can not only reconstruct the bones, we can reconstruct the very tips of your finger. This is in context. So on the day of judgment, when the unbelievers say, how will Allah be able to reconstruct our bones? So Allah says, not only the bones, we can reconstruct the very tips of your finger. So what does Allah mean by saying we can reconstruct the very tips of your finger? After science advanced in 1880, Sir Francis Galt had discovered the fingerprinting method. And he said that no two fingerprints, even in 1 million people, are identical. That means the tips of the finger have got fingerprints. And these fingerprints differ between all the individual human beings. Even in 1 million people, no two fingerprints will match exactly. So today, the police, the CID, the CIA, they use the fingerprinting method to identify the criminal or the robber, or if any theft has taken place. In identification, fingerprint is used. Now we use it for opening a lock. Put the fingerprint, the lock opens. So Allah says, on the day of judgment, leave aside the bones. After they have been disintegrated, I can even reconstruct in perfect order the very tips of the finger. Then verse number 5, 6 asks that, do you know what is Qiyamah? Or when will Qiyamah come? And the reply is there, when the sight is dazed and when the moon is buried in darkness. Verse number 8 in Surah Qiyamah. Verse number 6 says, when is Qiyamah? When the sight is dazed and when the moon is buried in darkness, or when the moon is eclipsed. And verse number 9 says, when the sun and moon will join. So this is the description of the day of resurrection. Now coming to your question, if on the day of resurrection the moon will get darkened, sometime the moon get darkened now also. If you're talking about eclipse, moon get eclipsed now also. So isn't there a contradiction? There's no contradiction at all. What the Quran is talking about, what will happen. And one of the things is, the moon will be buried in darkness. Or the moon is eclipsed. But that's not the only thing. The other thing, the sun and the moon will join. So that's the reason if there is an eclipse, the Prophet told us to read Salah. Salah through Khusuf. That when the eclipse is there, whether lunar or whether solar, you have to read the 2 rakah Salah. It's Sunnah. It is mustahab. When the sun becomes dark, when the earth comes between the sun and the moon. The moon becomes dark when the earth comes between the sun and the moon. And the sun becomes dark when the moon comes in between the earth and the sun. So here when the moon is eclipsed is talking about the lunar eclipse. that the earth comes in between, and that happens once in a year, once in few years. That's the reason the Prophet told us to pray it, because we fear that these are the signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The moon getting eclipsed is a sign of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So giving you a glimpse that finally, we have to die. We have to be accountable on the day of judgment. So there's no contradiction at all. So many a times there are similes giving you a taste of it, that was going to happen. But we don't see the moon and sun join now. This joining of the moon and sun will only take place in Qiyamah, not now. Certain indications are there which you have a taste of it. But the complete description in the Quran, and the Quran continues, what is Qiyamah, etc. All the descriptions are given. How will a person feel, etc. So that is complete. So this is talking about the Qiyamah. It's giving you signs of it. And there's no contradiction at all. And this is exactly what will happen on the day of resurrection, on the day of Qiyamah. I hope that answers the question.